Welcome to the From the Shadows podcast. I am your host, Shane Grove. And before we get started with this episode, I just want to remind everybody, if you want to find out everything that's From the Shadows podcast and more, go visit us at our website, fromtheshadowspodcast.com. There's a link to all our social media, including TikTok, which does not include me dancing on it. So if that's what you're going to go look for, I'm sorry to disappoint you. But you can find links to everything else, our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter, even our Patreon page, which has bonus episodes every month. And the regular episodes get up early and commercial free. So you can go check that out. If you really want to get a hold of me, you can find me at Shane Grove Author on Instagram and send me a message, or you can hit that contact button on the website, send me an email. I promise I'll get back to you, especially if you have story or an experience you want to share on air or just talk to me about. We'll figure out what's going on, and hopefully you come on and share it, and it'll be a good episode for our diehard listeners. So with that being said, I think we're going to have a fun episode here with a friend from our good friends at the Small Town Monsters, author, and I'm going to say ghost hunter, author, documentarian, Jason Hewlett. Welcome to the From the Shadows podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, Shane. Great to be here.
Hey, it's, whenever I get a text message from Heather Mosier that says, listen, I got somebody that is really going to be a good guest, I always take her word for it because she has not led me astray yet. So do not be the first one to ruin that streak.
That'd be horrible, actually, to be the first. Now there's so much pressure on me. I'm starting to sweat here.
listen, when the spotlight's on.
Right?
So Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have done here with Small Town Monsters here recently.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm from Canada, British Columbia, Canada, so Western Canada. I'm the co-founder of the Canadian Paranormal Society. We are an investigative group that focuses primarily on ghosts and hauntings, but we also dabble into the cryptozoology and ufology whenever the need arises. I have a journalism background, so I was a crime reporter for 10 years at the local paper here until it shut, and I have a degree in film studies, so I did a foundation film program way back in the 90s, 30 years ago. So, before things like Small Town Monsters existed.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've always looked for a way to combine all those three things. And I kind of, through my journey, I found myself meeting Eli Watson, of course, first with Cryptid Campfire, and then now he's with Small Town Monsters as well. And back in May of 2023, the Small Town Monsters team came to British Columbia, and they did a documentary called On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin, which was about the origin of Sasquatch at Harrison Hot Springs. But Eli had a few days where he could kind of go off and do his own thing. And he wanted to go to Lake Okanagan to do a documentary on Ogopogo, which is our resident lake monster. It's basically Canada's Loch Ness Monster. And he reached out to me was wondering if I wanted to join him because he knew my history and the stuff that I had done. And I was like, of course I did. And kind of ironically, the same week that we talked about that, I had started researching a book on Ogopogo. And so it was almost like the universe kind of going, you two got to work together on this.
Divine intervention, right?
Divine intervention. That was January of 2023. And that May, we found ourselves meeting each other for the first time face-to-face in Kelowna. And we made what eventually became Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake Okanagan, which debuted 2 weeks ago at Monster Fest. And of course, from that also came my book, The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster, which was published by Small Town Monsters as well. So it was a kind of this interesting, just how that all happened. And that's kind of what brought us here tonight, Shane.
So everybody, and I guess I shouldn't make such a broad statement, but almost everybody has heard of the Loch Ness Monster and is aware of what that lore is and what that is. But maybe not everybody's heard of Ogopogo, right? Am I
Yeah,
pronouncing?
Ogopogo. Yeah.
Yeah. See, it's not as sexy a name as Loch Ness Monster, right? So, describe the history of Ogopogo and, some of the sightings and stuff that maybe continue to this day.
Well, they do actually. And the funny thing is with Ogopogo, like it is actually the most documented lake monster in the world.
So even more than the Loch Ness
Even more
Monster.
than Loch Ness. Like there are Ogopogo sightings that involve like 12 to 15 people seeing it at the same time. That's the thing that's crazy about Ogopogo. And the word itself, Ogopogo, is a made up word. That's actually not what it's called. That was something that Tourism Kelowna is sort of the main city on Lake Okanagan. And the creature is actually, and it's not as sexy a name either. It's way harder to pronounce. It's Nsnahaitku. It's an indigenous
That's
word,
terrible.
which means spirit of the lake, basically. So the indigenous people had been seeing, we'll just call it Ogopogo because that's way easier to say, for like thousands of years and believe it to be their water spirit. So Bigfoot is like their forest spirit and Ogopogo is like their water spirit. But what happened is the first European settlers started coming in and seeing it. And so Nsnahaitku got sort of broken down to Nahaktik kind of thing, which was like sort of easier to pronounce. But back in like the 20s or 30s, when sort of the dance halls were really big, there was this song that circulated called the Funny Foxtrot. And it was about someone looking for the creature in the lake. And they just called it Ogopogo because it rhymed with what they were singing. But the name stuck. So everyone now knows the creature of Lake Okanagan is Ogopogo.
As a songwriter, I try not to write myself into corners where Ogopogo becomes the word you have to use to get out to the next level.
And it's in Cursed Waters. Eli actually found the original song, original song, and it's a horrible song, man. Like it is a terrible, terrible song. Like people get up in arms about racism nowadays, but this just took it to like whole new levels as well. But then they just had this lake monster in. It's a terrible song. And ironically, the copyright for Ogopogo ran out like 2 years ago. So the community of Vernon, which held the copyright, gave it back to the West Bank First Nations, and they didn't even care because that's not what their thing is, right? They made a big deal out of giving the name back to the indigenous people.
There's no streaming royalties.
Right?
It's not burning up Spotify. So this is a creature then that has been seen for, and I'm not entirely sure how long like the Loch Ness stuff dates back, but it's hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. I'd even go back probably thousands. I'm sure people have been seeing something in Loch Ness even before, the earliest people that ever lived in the United Kingdom probably have been seeing it, right?
I think of monks. I think I remember a story of a monk or something in Loch Ness having an experience, and that may be one of the first ones. But so how does what people are seeing in Ogopogo compared to what people see or think they're seeing in Loch Ness?
Well, this is what's interesting. Doing the research, actually, Loch Ness and Lake Okanagan are only separated by a few degrees of latitude.
Okay.
They're both very long, very narrow glacial lakes with the same kind of salmonoid fish population. Lake Okanagan is bigger. It's a much bigger lake. It's a much deeper lake, but they're very similar. And if you look historically at what people are seeing, they're very similar looking creatures. Now, everybody, when they think of Nessie, thinks of like, the plesiosaur kind of thing, but that's only because of the surgeon's photo, which has been proven to be a fake.
Yeah.
Most of the creatures that people are seeing in lakes look like Ogopogo. Long serpentine bodies, head like a dragon or a horse, and the tail of a whale.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they're very similar what's being spotted. I mean, and even Champ is technically supposed to look very similar to that. We've got a creature living off of the coast of British Columbia in the Pacific Ocean called the Cadborosaurus, which also looks very similar. So there could be an argument put forward that what people are seeing in lakes kind of all through it's kind of the lake monster belt around the world is kind of the same species or offshoots of the same species, if you want to go down that kind of more scientific route. So an undiscovered, as yet unidentified species of aquatic creature, probably mammalian or amphibian, which could explain why they're able to stay below water for so long. And these lakes are cold lakes, they're cold bodies of water. So that's kind of the good argument for that. But if you look at what the indigenous people say, this is a much more supernatural creature, like it has more supernatural properties. And if you see it, it's manifesting itself in more of a physical form, which they believe is why you don't see it so much. You're lucky if you see Ogopogo or capture footage of it, because most of the time it's just literally as the spirit of the lake, and occasionally it just forms into sort of this physical being that people spot.
Well, that's an interesting thought of what is out there in that lake. So, what are some of the really compelling eyewitness accounts that you guys came across? Because I got to assume that you guys did historical research and then went and interviewed actual eyewitnesses, present day eyewitnesses.
Yeah, like we interviewed Dale and Colleen and their friend Myrna, who they took the most recent photograph, which surfaced, if you'll pardon the pun, in October of 2022, and it actually made the rounds in the media worldwide. And it has been a much debated picture, but it looks like it is the head just below the surface of the water, with you can almost see the long neck going beneath the water, and it resembles almost exactly the Solon statue, which is in kind of the park in Kelowna, which people go look at. I've been going and visiting that statue since I was a kid, and I've since taken my son to it. And that was like sort of done at a time where there wasn't much boats on the water. They were in a sailboat, which could explain why if they did capture a picture of the creature, it might have been sitting towards the surface, because motorboats might drive it beneath it. But that was the most recent picture. But we went out in their sailboat with them to the spot where they took the picture and kind of heard their story. And definitely, like, the vibe we got from them is that they didn't fake what they took a picture of. And given the description of it, and they like, this head was like 3 feet big, like 3 feet wide. Like, it's huge, which kind of fits with like past sort of video footage and photographs, which depict this thing being 40 to 60 feet long. So it kind of just fit in with that. And we were in part of the lake, which was like, you felt very vulnerable out in this water, that something that big could kind of come up out of there, and
especially sitting in a sailboat. Like, I don't know how big this,
right?
I mean, I'm picturing like a little 3-person thing with the like,
a little bit bigger than that, but it wasn't very big. It was not very big at all. But fortunately, too, like when it comes to sightings of Ogopogo, there's only one from a few hundred years back where it felt like Ogopogo was behaving in an aggressive way, and that's with John McDougall. And he was a Métis settler in the area that was taking these 3 horses across the lake. And basically, suddenly, one by one, the horses, they were tethered to his boat. They started getting pulled underwater by something. And he had to cut the rope. Otherwise, his boat might have been pulled underwater as well. That's the only act of aggression that's ever been documented attributed to Ogopogo. Now, I mean, that could be the lake current, cold water, the horses getting tired. Like, you could come up with lots of logical explanations, but they definitely felt back then that this was Ogopogo. And now, what could have driven that is the natives of the area definitely believed that before you cross the lake to appease the spirit of the lake, you would present some kind of offering in the form of tobacco, a little slice of meat, something like that, to show your respect and guarantee safe travel. And if you respect the lake, Nsnahi Itku would respect you and allow you to pass. And McDougall was apparently someone that was very much a player of the day. He made a lot of babies with the indigenous women, didn't seem to respect the stories about Nsnahi Itku, and he may have paid the price that way too, right? So that's kind of one of the first earliest Ogopogo stories out there, and it is documented.
That sounds very sensational. Like
it does, doesn't
it? Like William Randolph Hearst would have been like, "Hey, can I run this on the front page?" That's a terrible Randolph Hearst reference here.
That's good that you can work them in, though.
I know.
Happen every day.
Exactly. So like the people out in the sailboat, what did they think they were seeing? I mean, and at what point did they realize this is weird because I mean, when you go out into that lake, is this on the forefront of everybody's mind? Do they expect to see a sea monster out there, or is it just, something some people talk about? I mean, does everybody go out there thinking, "Oh my gosh, is this today going to be the day?"
But people who live in like Kelowna and in that whole region in the smaller communities along Lake Okanagan, everybody knows the story. Everybody's heard about. Colleen had grown up hearing stories of Ogopogo and knew of people that believed they've seen it. So the first thing that they sort of thought, like Dale thought that there's maybe some driftwood or something that could be a boating hazard. Hence they went by to take a picture of it. But they were kind of like, once they took that picture, they just went back to shore. Like it threw them enough that they wanted to go back to shore. And it took them a few days to decide to really even go public with it. And the only reason Dale did is just maybe on the off chance it was still something that could be a boating hazard and he wanted people to know. But once that picture started making the rounds, like it was immediately attributed to Ogopogo. And there's lots of people who think it was like, an upside down duck, a dog swimming, but no dog would have been swimming that far out in the water.
And upside down,
3 feet wide. I mean, oh yeah. And, other people think it's like a decomposing crawfish, which again would not be 3 feet in diameter. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But I mean, there's like the Folden film from the 60s, which was shot showing something that they believe was 40 to 60 feet long moving across the lake. And it's one of the best pieces of video evidence you're going to find of it. There's other footage over the years. Can't remember who shot it, but where 3 things were spotted in the water at the same time. And a water skier kind of came along and fell right in the vicinity of these 3 things. And people have studied that footage and can't make out what those 3 things could have been. So it's being attributed to Ogopogo. There's a gentleman who swam the length of Lake Okanagan, fundraiser, who said he saw creatures swimming, small versions of them swimming along beside him for a time, almost like they were just junior creatures, like going along. Like there's lots of different stories attributed to this, and more than one at a time.
How big were the ones the guy said were swimming along beside him? Like 5, 6?
He just sort of said smaller, like not 40 feet long kind of thing, like less than 20, if my memory serves me correctly. Like that's still, man, if I was swimming and I saw 3 things like that, I would probably drown because I'd panic. Like,
I mean, anything over a foot long is way too long to be swimming. Holy smokes. So there's a lot of legit, like those are some real, like up close eyewitness accounts. Like
there is. And when I ventured into writing the book, I wasn't convinced that this could be real. There's no way that a lake monster could be real. But by the time Eli and I were done filming and I'd put the book together, my whole belief pattern changed, that I believe that there is something living in Lake Okanagan. Part of me, because my background is more into being a paranormal investigator, I can believe the indigenous belief that this is something that's their water spirit that occasionally shows itself as a physical thing. And even if you to look at it legitimately, when you're out on this lake that's huge and so deep, it doesn't suddenly become impossible to believe that a creature could live like that, especially if it's something that could stay submerged for long periods of time. And if you believe the stories, they found like tunnels, underwater caves and tunnels, in Lake Okanagan. And there's people who believe that these could go miles to other lakes. There's the Columbia River, which does lead from Lake Okanagan eventually down to the Pacific Ocean. So something could move back and forth.
And going back to Loch Ness, that's kind of the prevailing theory about that. There's a spot where you can get out of the loch.
Yeah.
And out into open water and, travel back and forth.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, it became a lot more legitimate to me.
How deep is that lake?
There's people that believe it could even be bottomless in portions. Like it just keeps going down. But I mean, there's places where we were like maybe 40, 50 feet from shore that was 250 feet deep, like instantly. It drops off very quick. It's a very narrow lake because it's in a valley. And there's even deeper than that in places, like it's several hundred feet deep.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of it in comparison to some of the Great Lakes. And, I think Lake Michigan goes in 700, 800, 900 feet in spots,
Yeah. They believe that this could go as deep as that,
Wow. So So you're kind of like you came around doing the investigation.
Yeah, I definitely came around in that. It's a very different. It's easy to sort of say, yeah, no, like it's such a limited body of water, blah blah blah. But as soon as you go out in a sailboat, like to where people saw this, and you're looking around and you can't see the bottom, and your perceptions change. We did an expedition to Rattlesnake Island too with Bill Stesiak, who's been a longtime Ogopogo researcher, and that's Rattlesnake Island is where Ogopogo is believed to live. That's where a lot of the cave systems are, and that's where a lot of sightings are. Even then, like going out on that boat and around that section, your perception changes. You become a lot more convinced that something large could exist in that body of water. And like we'd already talked about, there's so many people seeing something in that lake.
And what is a known creature in that lake that could be, because like Lake Erie, for instance, I was a guest on a podcast, and they I think, what do they call it? The lake. I mean, it's Lake Erie Monster, but there was it had a cute name.
They always do.
They had a better name. And through just the research that I did, it became pretty evident that what people were seeing were big sturgeon in Lake Erie, because they were so prevalent in the 1800s, got almost fished to extinction. And so the most of the sightings of the Lake Erie Monster were 1800s up into the 1900s, where there were hardly any sturgeon. Then you couldn't fish them for like 100 years, and then all of a sudden some sightings started coming back because the sturgeon were coming back. So that is a creature that, if you don't, it's a prehistoric creature. I mean, a sturgeon is. So is there stuff like that in that lake that could be misidentified, or is it just, there is nothing else that explains it?
There is not. There are no sturgeon in Lake Okanagan, and nothing to kind of match the description of what people are seeing. That's what makes it even more compelling, I think, of a story. Especially when you take into, like, the tail of a whale, the body of a serpent, and the head of a horse or a dragon, right?
Yeah.
The picture that they took looks like it's the head looks just like on the Solon statue in the Kelowna Park. Like, it's pretty convincing. Like, and every depiction of Ogopogo in native drawings looks the same. Like, its likeness has not changed over the years. So,
really,
yeah, it's real. There's something there, man. Like, there's something there.
And I would think with technology, I mean, it's only got to be a matter of time for really good, because that's my question about Loch Ness is, I know they have cameras set up to observe Loch Ness, and they've never really caught anything. They've never really
they
caught
have the odd video evidence, but nothing too substantial. Not like we came across with like Ogopogo. Like, that's the thing, right? Like, there's a lot of footage of Ogopogo. Yeah. I mean, there's some debunked footage too, of course, as there always is. Like, Unsolved Mysteries bought footage shot like in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, that tourists took, and they said they caught Ogopogo on camera with like a handy cam footage. So Unsolved Mysteries bought the rights to it, and they did an episode, and they came to show, and how Robert stacked it as, okay, and now we have the footage. And they took it, and it's like, my dad and I are watching because we're really interested, and it's like, it's a beaver flapping its tail onto the water. Like,
I'm guessing Robert Stackton didn't cop to it was being a beaver. Right?
No, they no.
Seems to be a lonely beaver. I think it's, gosh. No, I mean, I do think that there's so much unknown, especially in the water. I mean, that goes without saying. I mean, for crying out loud, I think a lot of us believe that there's alien bases in the water, and that's where some of those UFOs are coming from, that are UAPs or whatever they want to call them. But so how could you not think that maybe there is something that isn't just hanging out? I mean, most fish don't hang out on top of the water, so if if you're a creature like that, there's really no reason to be up there and be seen. You're
There
just down
isn't.
there doing your thing.
No, and you wouldn't surface except for specific reasons, right? Like that's just it. And I mean, and maybe it's more nocturnal, so it comes out more at night when there aren't people on the water. You're not going to see it. And or in the case of like Dale and Colleen, they were in their sailboat in October when the lake traffic's very rare, and they were in a quiet sailboat. And that was also during the height of our salmon run, where the salmon kind of go through their spawn. So maybe it's coming up just feeding kind of along the surface, right? Like, so why not?
Wow. I love it. I'm sold. You convinced me. And I haven't even seen any of this. I mean, that's it. We're marking it off the list. Ogopogo, 100%. 100%. So what kind of reception have you guys got from the documentary then so far?
When it had its premiere at Monster Fest, it screened on the Friday night. It went over very well. People were very receptive to it, really enjoyed it. Like Lyle Blackburn was there, and he came up to me and he said, great job, man, well researched. That meant a lot coming from someone like Lyle Blackburn. Like I was blown away. Ken Gerhard saw part of it and he really liked it. It went over really well, and because the book debuted at the same time. There's people kind of coming up and wanting to buy copies of the book and have it signed and talk about it and all that kind of stuff. And that continued the next day during the main event of Monster Fest. So people really seemed to enjoy the documentary, and the feedback I've got so far on the book is people are really enjoying the book as well as a nice kind of complimentary companion piece to the documentary. And that feels really good, like to have been invited to be a part of something like this. With a group of people whose work I admire and who turned out to be some really good people and have become really good friends, and to have that been so well received by their fan base and probably even new people that maybe wouldn't, because it's so different for them, right? Like they don't do aquatic creatures very. They did it on the Trail of Champ many years ago, Alex Petikoff, but usually they're into the Bigfoot and the Dogman and the UFO. So it was a bit out of their recent wheelhouse, but people really seem to be drawn to it and enjoying it, and that's great.
Yeah, and listen, Ken Gerhard, Lyle Blackburn, you're 100% correct. Those guys, I mean, they do research on research. You know what I'm saying? I mean, those guys are, written tons of books. They're very knowledgeable. You could call them up probably and say, hey, look, I need you in 5 minutes to be a special guest on this, whatever. And they could talk about it. So for them to say how much they liked it and how well it was researched, it's got to be top notch, and Small Town Monsters doesn't do anything bad. I mean, people may not love the subject matter or agree with the results, but ultimately the product is, top notch. Super.
It is. And you're right. They have not done one bad doc yet or YouTube show. Like I've watched all the films and I've caught like a lot of the YouTube. I can't keep up with the YouTube content. I only have so much free time in my day.
I don't know how those guys have all the time they do to do all that stuff.
I know, right? But it's all good and it's all solid and it's all well researched, and they bring people in that know what they're talking about and don't sensationalize it, right? So it's really, it's great stuff. I can't believe I got to be a part of it. Like that was pretty wild.
So you got the first one under your belt here for Small Town Monsters. Is there any talk about what's next?
Well, it's interesting because I actually was after Eli and I made that, and I had to drop them off in Chilliwack or Harrison Hot Springs where they were making On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin. So I actually was interviewed for that about Sasquatch. So I'm in On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin. It hasn't come out yet. But I'm in that as well, which I thought was really cool. So actually that was done first, but the Cursed Waters has come out before it, which has been kind of cool. So I've done two things, and there's more to come, I'm sure. Like Seth and I have talked a bit, and it'll be cool to see what happens next.
So I want to dive into some of your paranormal stuff.
Sure.
So you've done some paranormal, well, sounds like quite a bit paranormal research, but some UFO stuff too.
It's not like some where I am. There's not like a boatload of UFO sightings. Like there is in sort of Powell River, which is sort of further to the south on Vancouver Island. I mean, we've seen stuff in the sky, but we haven't had any major, like big event UFO stuff. We've sort of dabbled a bit more. We've gone into sort of doing like some Bigfoot research and following up on Bigfoot encounters that have occurred, which has been kind of cool because where I am right now, so is kind of right in the middle of Sasquatch country in BC.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of starts down at the coast, goes up through like the Harrison Hot Spring area, comes up and through the Shuswap and goes on. So there's been a number of Bigfoot sightings, even really close to town, like, about 15, 20 minutes out of town. So we've had the opportunity as a team to look into those. One that I think could be quite legitimate, like in the end, we were actually able to capture some wood knocks at a lake.
Oh, really?
The lake up in kind of what we call the Bonaparte Plateau area. And we were invited up there by a gentleman named Mike, who has been hunting and fishing up there for like 20 years. And he goes out on this boat, and every time he gets to one end of the lake, these knocks come in threes. Boom, boom, boom. And there's a pause, and then they'll start again, like boom, boom, boom. And those continue until he leaves that part of the lake. So we went up there with our gear, and we went up there with the cameras and stuff because we were filming what we want to believe. And myself and cameraman Marcus and this Mike guy go out in a boat to cross over to that part of the lake. And our buddy Sean stayed behind because we couldn't all fit in the boat. And it was this really slow sinking boat. It was like...
Well, those are the best kind.
Those are the best kind that sink slowly because we can actually make it across.
The ones that give you a chance to feel like you're going to make it, right?
Yeah. This part of the lake where these knocks have been said to happen for like 20 years, and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. And I kind of said to this Mike guy, like, we should go. Have you ever been to shore? And he's like, no. Like, there's no way, right? And I said, I don't blame you, but we should go. So we landed on this part of the lake and got out of the boat. Looked around, still hearing no knock. So I even started doing some of my own to try to generate some sort of response. Nothing. And this is typical of all this sort of stuff. I'm sure, as you know, Shane. So we're like, screw it. Let's just go back. Got in the slowly sinking boat and started going back across. And as we're getting to shore, Sean there starts yelling like, did you hear the knocks? I'm like, what? I'm like, did you hear the knocks? I said, no, that was me. And he says, no. They were like coming from over here. And he actually recorded knocks that were coming from a different part of the lake. So it's like we went to where they usually got heard. And because of that, whatever was doing the knocking moved around to another part of the lake and was starting to knock, probably even in response to my knocks. Well, we were over there and we got it. We recorded them like we've got them. And actually those knocks do turn up in On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin, because we shared the footage and the audio with Seth. So that was kind of neat.
I would say, well, first of all, you didn't sink, and
right?
And you did capture some, because you're right. I mean, most of the time, and I'm sure you have many ghost hunting stories where nothing happens. Like, you can ask for it to happen all you want, or entice it all to happen. It doesn't mean. I mean, they're not there at our pleasure, to perform for us, whether it's a Bigfoot or a UFO or a ghost, and that's the reality. Is most of the investigations are nothing,
I'd say like a good 75 to 80%, like just nothing happens. You're just waiting and asking questions. Like you say, even trying, we don't provoke, we don't believe in that, but just trying to do anything like, come on, if you just show yourself, we'll leave. You know what I mean? You get desperate that way and nothing happens. But to have that happen with the knocks as it did, I thought it was fitting of everything that I know about any kind of investigation into the paranormal, be it cryptozoology or whatever, that the activity usually happens where you're not focusing your attention. And that can become a dangerous thing in investigations where you've heard the story about the ghost that walks out of the bathroom at 3:00 in the morning in this one part. So you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And meanwhile, it's like on the other end of the hall, doing that kind of thing, and you're just not paying attention to it. Or I find it really bad we don't use a lot of psychics for that reason, because they will distract you. would rather go in and investigate first and compile what we believe is evidence, and then we will invite one to come in and see if what they say or what their readings are support what we've already found out. But quite often to bring them in first for a walkthrough, you don't know if what they're telling you is accurate or not, and they can lead you down the wrong path if you put too much faith in it. So we like to work in reverse that way. Like, no disrespect to people who do have legitimate psychic abilities, but we just don't want our investigation skewed before it's even begun in any way, shape, or form.
So what made you want to start? Like, what was the thing that got you into doing paranormal investigation?
Well, it all began back when I was 5 years old, and my mom and I had gone to pick up a friend of mine for a sleepover, and for whatever reason, I stayed in the car. Well, she went up to the house and knocked and got my friend and stuff like that. And it was an old Gremlin, a hatchback Gremlin, which are hideous automobiles.
I had a Pacer. I had a 75 Pacer. So
very similar in stylings. Yeah, this one was purple too, which made it even worse.
Styling has nothing to do.
No. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And so while I'm sitting in the back of this car, and I clearly remember looking at the street through the hatchback, and there's nothing there. Like, there's not even anyone on the street. And then suddenly this face appears. And I always describe it as being kind of mongoloidish, like Jason Voorhees without the mask. Like, it was a hideous face that terrified me. And I can still see it, like, I'm be 52 in like a week and a bit. And this is like when I was 5, like that long, I can still picture it. And 1 second it's not there, then it's there, and then it's gone. And in that time, I dropped to the floor. Like, I was terrified. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see it anymore. I didn't move until I heard footsteps come up, and it was my buddy. And I asked him, was he messing around outside the car? And he's like, no, I just got here. And true, I could just hear his footsteps coming up. So I said, did you see anyone? He's like, no, there's nobody around. And my mom came up, and I asked her the same questions, and she's like, no, there's no one here. And she's a teacher, so she's just like, you just imagined it. But that really shook me. And I haven't forgotten it. And that kind of kicked off the whole, what was that? And why did it happen? And what's out there? And so I just would slowly just start, like you say, in search of, was around. So I'd watch those. When Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World came out, I'd watch those. I'd order the Scholastic books or find them in the library. Mm-hmm. And would continue to do that kind of research just on my own. And it would meet like-minded people. So we'd always talk about it and stuff like that. But when I was in journalism school, way back in the early 2000s, I took a magazine writing course, and I had a whole semester to write one magazine article, which is the most unrealistic thing because usually you crank them out in like a day or two. You don't have that long. But I decided I wanted to write for the Fortean Times magazine out of the UK. Okay. And there's a place outside of Kamloops where I live called Tronquil Sanitarium, and it's a former tuberculosis clinic that became a mental institution that was shut down in the early 80s when they deinstitutionalized all of them. And as soon as they deinstitutionalized all of them, the stories started about this place and the urban legends began, and people would break in to get high and do drink, but also say they would see these spooky things and all this activity. So I knew the caretaker at the time. I convinced him to let me come in for a night. And so I found a psychic, a skeptic, a guy that was in TV who could bring all the camera and audio equipment we would need, and then someone who said they had an incident occur out there. They had a sighting occur out there. And that was my first real investigation because we had the run of this whole place, which was like a small city, empty city, for the entire night. And we could go there's a tunnel system, elaborate tunnel system underneath where they used to move the patients and supplies. And absolutely nothing happened the entire time we were there, except all our fresh batteries died at once within like 10 minutes of leaving the vehicle, and we had to go recharge them all. But nothing that I would say convinced me that there was anything spooky going on. But boy, was that a rush, like to be able to do that and to kind of so that kicked it off. And so I eventually would go back to Tronquil several times and did have kind of spooky stuff happen there that I couldn't really wrap my head around, but I had no real investigative method. I just was kind of doing whatever felt natural. And that went on kind of until 2017 when I met my good friend Peter Wren, who was then president of the Vancouver Paranormal Society, and I became a member of their team and then a society director. And in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, he had moved to Kamloops, where I live, and we just co-founded our own team, the Canadian Paranormal Society, and kind of continued the work from there.
So what? So tell me the scariest thing that happened to you on an investigation, like that sticks with you even more so than the guy's face in the which, by the way, I've never heard anybody describe a paranormal experience like that, where a face appeared and then just like looking out through a car. I've never heard that. Like,
and I've never run into anyone who has either. That's why sometimes I look back and I was like, did I imagine all that? But it was real. Like that terrified me so much. Cause it was just there and gone. Like, it's like a gotcha.
Yeah.
But I did have, and this was actually at Tranquille. I went back, my first investigation was like February of 2003. So 21 years ago. And then Dawn and I went back I've been back several times in between, but in October of 2004, Donna, who was the psychic that I went with the first time, her and I went, we did some exploring, and we had some stuff happen that was just weird. But we decided we wanted to kind of go down into the tunnel system. So we went down there with flashlights. We did some exploring. We're looking around. And it's easy to get lost if you're not careful, kind of thing. So the caretaker had well marked it. And we came out in the basement of the laundry facility. And so there's a whole laundry building there. So we come out in the basement
of the laundry.
I know. Like, it's nuts. It's nuts. There's a whole school there. There's like a fire hall. There's dorms. There's old doctors' houses. There's like, it is a city. It is a little city unto itself. And we were losing daylight. Like, we went out during the daytime, and it's like, okay, we should probably leave. Do we want to go back to the car sort of on the surface, or do we want to go back through the tunnels? And we decided we'll go back through the tunnels, just in case. Now, the doors in these tunnels, they're like nothing. Like, they're full doors, but they're almost like those old doors in the Westerns. You can kind of just push your way through them. There's nothing really holding them. And
yes,
they're like Batwing doors, but they're full doors. And so turned around, and through the doors that we just went through, I grabbed the handle and I started to open it. And then something reefed back on that door with so much force. Like, I'm 6'1", I was about 200 pounds. It pulled me off my feet, and I slammed into the door. And we'd just gone through there like a minute prior. And Donna took off like up the stairs and out. And I'm not going to lie, I wasn't that far behind her, because that was like, there's nobody there. There's no way that there could have been any, you know what I mean? Anyone on the other side of that door. There wasn't any hydraulics that could have done that. It was, and I didn't investigate for a couple of years after that, because that just freaked me out so bad.
Well, when you start considering the physical force it would take to do that, just to yank the door back as you're yanking it open, right? I mean, that's so when you consider that force, then you're thinking, oh my gosh, what if it didn't do it to the door, it just did it to me? Like, it could.
Yeah, what if I was pulled? What if I was pulled or pushed or what have you, right? Like, yeah. And I think, and I'm right there, I can understand, because you have to start thinking, okay, this is great. We're going, and maybe we'll see a mist, maybe we'll see an apparition, hear a voice, but you don't go in there thinking that something's going to be physically capable of moving you, or just hurting you or whatever. Not in those cases, So I don't blame you for not investigating for a couple of years. I was out. I was like, that's it. I'm out. Like, I'm out. You know what I mean? Like, it was, and it shook me for like that. I remember the rest of that. It was like a couple of days I was badly shaken by that. Like, and I was at that point, I'd have been 30. So like, 30, 31. So it was like, I'm old enough to like, I'd been on the job as a crime reporter for a year. I can take care of myself. I have like a martial arts background, but it was just like, I couldn't see what it was. And it actually physically affected me. And that's where you start to believe like that the people who have said they've been physically hurt by things they can't see. It might take a lot of energy, but there are things out there that can do that. And the thought of that is quite frightening, especially because, like I said, back then I didn't know what I was doing. There's things you can do now to kind of protect yourself. You know what I mean? You can take certain steps, but you got to think that's a former tuberculosis clinic where people surely would have died. Then it was a mental institution. There's lots of negative energy there. So whatever's there probably just occasionally gets pissed off at people wandering around, and it wanted us gone. It did put up with us all day, and it's like, nope, you guys are done.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is you think about how restless and crazy it was for whatever spirits, that are there now in their real state, and they probably are like, just leave us alone. We're finally like, there's no other crazy people here. There's no other, sick people here. We just have some peace and quiet. And now you're like coming down here with a flashlight and,
digital recorder and
yeah. Exactly. Wow. So I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting like maybe something told you to get out.
Oh, I've been told to get out, and I've been sworn at and told to F off like so many times I've lost count.
Really?
Right? That's not frightening at all. It's just kind of par for the course. But and especially once you have something like that happen with the door, like that's after that, like it's kind of like, whatever. Like, you don't get rattled by too much.
Now, have you ever personally seen an apparition?
I've seen like a shadow figure. That would be the closest. I haven't, like, Peter's seen like a few and he's taken pictures of them. But I have seen, I've heard the disembodied voices, and I've heard like footsteps, you know what I mean? And that kind of thing. And I've had weird stuff happen and like little toy things get thrown off of shelves, but I've only seen one real, what I could say is an apparition in the form of a shadow person. And that's actually in the house that I'm living in now. I'm in the basement. My office is in the basement, and I saw it in like the next room over. And that was while waiting. I used to do like a campus radio show. It was like a pop culture show, and we do it on Friday nights. And I was waiting for my co-host Sean, the guy who caught the audio recording of the wood knocks, was coming to pick me up. He always picked me up, and then we'd head up together. And so I was just kind of sitting on the floor listening to music, waiting. And when you're being watched, you suddenly get the sense that someone's behind you.
Yeah.
I had that, and I thought it was maybe my wife had come downstairs, maybe to let me know Sean was there or ask me a question. And I remember turning around, and there was this tall, thin, black figure, like no details, just tall, thin, black figure. And we stared at each other for what it might have been like a 1,000, 2 1,000 count. And then it turned around and it just flitted away.
Now, this is, this isn't a setup. We didn't talk about this before, but you saying that, this is a fresh story, so nobody has heard this on air. So I just came back from my oldest daughter's house in South Carolina, and I think people that follow us on social media, I put some pictures up of where I was in the pool area recording a couple podcasts last week now, but right now this week. And so Tuesday, right? It was Tuesday. My wife and I are down in the pool. So the pool sits down in this, you come off the house, there's a porch, and then there's levels, okay, that you go down. So the pool's down below the level of the house, basically. So my granddaughters are sitting up on the porch watching TV. They're like 5 and 3 or 5, 6 and 4 or whatever. So they're doing nothing but just watching TV. And their dog is sitting outside the screened-in porch, and Birdie is laying there. And all of a sudden, now my daughter's at work, she's a prosecutor, and my son-in-law had a dentist appointment. That's why we were there by ourselves. So and I didn't know what time it was. And all of a sudden, as I'm standing in the edge of the pool, inside the pool, the dog sets up and just starts barking like its head off. And I'm like, I wonder if Josh is home. Maybe the dog, it was just weird. And I look up, and from where I'm sitting, I can see the garage the window of the garage, and the bottom of the window's up. So I'm looking through the screen, and I see this shadow, okay? And I see it, and it looks like it's bending down. So it's in the window, bends down, and I think it's going to get into, I think it's Josh home getting in the refrigerator to get something to drink before he comes out on the back porch and says hi to us. And so I say to my wife, I go, "Oh, it's Josh. He's home. I just saw him in the window. All I saw was a black figure." Okay. And she goes, "Oh, okay." She goes, "Man, I can't believe he's back already from this dentist appointment." So we like go back to floating in the pool a little bit, and Birdie stops barking. And I go, "Man, is he not coming back in the house? Like, is he not coming inside?" And it was like 40 minutes later, he finally he goes, "Hey, hey girls." And I'm like, "Oh boy." So I go, "Josh, have you been home this whole time and just not come out?" And he goes, "No." "Why?" He goes, "I just got home." And I go, "Okay." And I had heard a garbage truck out on the street. So now I'm hoping that what I saw was a reflection from garbage men walking down the driveway, and he goes, I take the trash to the dump. Why?" I'm like, "Okay, I don't know how to tell you this, but because the window was up and I was looking through the screen, I know I'm not seeing a reflection. I was in a shadow off of somebody, even if it was on the other side of the house outside, doesn't appear like that. It is cast onto something." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm telling you, I saw somebody in your garage bend down, and I thought it was you getting, and he goes, "It was not me." Now, of course, when my daughter got home and we told her the story, she was not impressed, but she's a little more analytical. And I'm just like, I would have never looked, like if the dog didn't sit up and start barking, and it wasn't like the dog got up and like was focused on the garage, but something and the dog never barks. It's like just lays there. And it got up and just started barking, 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 and made me look. I'd have never seen that. I'd have never even known anything like that was happening.
That's fast because the dog knew. So there was something that got the dog's attention. And so who's to say that whatever that wasn't the cause?
That
right?
It's too much of a coincidence not to think. But the weird thing was, it wasn't like the dog got up and went running over to the dog just got up, started barking, and then once I looked and saw, then it just kind of laid back down. Like it wasn't bothered enough to go over and like growl or something. It just was barking like, "Hey, there's something here that shouldn't be here." And it's so
that's wild, man.
I was, and the thing was, is I just, when I turned to my wife and said, "Hey, Josh is home," and she's like, "Oh, okay," and I'm like, "Yeah, I just saw him in there," and I didn't think anything. I didn't think it was a shadow figure. I thought it was in there.
That's wild.
So, and that's the first time I've ever seen. Well, I have seen like a shadow. I don't even know if it was a shadow figure, but I saw a figure walk into a bathroom, and then I went into the bathroom and there was nobody there.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like this. Like I thought that was a person, that walked into the bathroom. But this was just like, once you start replaying it in your head, you're like, okay, I don't,
What was that?
Don't know. I don't know. I don't know. So it was weird. And it's funny. As soon as you said it, I'm like, oh my gosh. Shadow figure. Because that had to be, I don't know. So there you go.
That's great. That's a good experience. Like that's a good personal experience. Like it's got.
Well, it kind of was for me because now I'm like 800 miles away. I don't know how my like when they go out to the garage the next time, they're going to be so like cavalier about it and just be like,
you need to follow up with them and see if anyone sees anything in that or experiences any weird sensations in there or what, right? Like,
I'm pretty sure they'll be the first one to tell me because they'll be like, you're never allowed back. You're never allowed back.
Stay out of the house.
I mean, I didn't mean to end the show on my story.
No, that's a great. I love stories like that because they're more common than people think. Because that same thing, they initially think it's something else, or someone else, and then they're like, "Wait a minute."
Yes. Yeah,
that's exactly. That wait-a-minute moment that I find is the one that gives it its validity, right? Because there's like I'm sure that happens to more people than they'll ever want to admit to someone. That because if you and I didn't talk about this stuff and you didn't have an interest in it, and that still happened to you, would you just go telling people that, oh, guess what I saw in like the garage? No, you'd be like, they think you're nuts, or maybe I just imagined it, or what, right?
But you're 100% right. I would have probably been like, there had to be somebody casting a shadow, and I wouldn't have thought about it more critically any more than that. And said that, exactly. Well, wait a second, that's really impossible for a shadow to be freestanding in a space and move like that. Like shadows are cast onto walls and doors and stuff,
And the dog's reaction too.
Yeah.
Pets do very much sense. Small children sense these things that we're not seeing, right? They're way more in tune. So that's another added element to it that you can't discount.
Yep, 100%. 100%. So, yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it for now.
It's a good one, man. I'd stick to that.
I'm hoping that they don't, and I knew my daughter would not be as receptive because my son-in-law, he listens to the podcast some. Okay. And so he kind of, he knows what we're talking about and stuff. I don't think my daughter's super like, come on, I don't want a ghost in here. Please don't, Please.
My wife's like that too. She's not into this stuff. I've never told her about what I saw down here.
Oh boy.
But
yeah.
She's been with me long enough now and knows enough of some of the experiences I had that she's having a hard time not paying attention to it, but she just doesn't want to hear it. Like,
there you go. There you go. Well, Jason, I want you to share with everybody where they can go find Cursed Waters, and then the Legend of Ogopogo, the book, like where they can get that book, get the documentary, and maybe, like you said, get them as companion pieces, one right after another.
Well, the Cursed Waters is like it's had its debut. I believe, I don't know if the DVD Blu-rays for sale yet, and it hasn't, as of our conversation, I haven't heard exactly when it's coming, like it's going to hit, but it's supposed to be sometime this month. Okay. This month that people will be able to see that. The book, The Legend of Ogopogo, is currently available from smalltownmonsters.com and via Amazon. So it's out right now and it's for sale, and please pick up a copy. And then as soon as Cursed Waters hits, like keep up with Small Town Monsters to find out the exact date. But when it hits, it'll be announced everywhere. I mean, Dogman Territory just came out, and they've done a good job of getting the word out. So,
yeah, and if you're gonna, and this is a good public service announcement, if you're gonna buy a book from Small Town Monsters, buy it from them directly.
Yes.
Don't buy it from Amazon, even though it might get there the next day. Wait a couple days, get it from because it really helps Small Town Monsters and the authors and everybody that's involved with those projects if you just get it directly from them. And then
exactly.
So you mentioned like you did some documentary or did some films for the We Want to Believe, right? Is that
it was a web series that we had. Yes, a web series that we had that ran 2020 to 2022 when I was manager of the Paranormal Network for Joe Blow Media. And those episodes, I believe, are still out on YouTube. I think they're still floating around out there. And it's just basically whenever we were allowed to film our investigations, be it at a historical site or someone's home, etc., we would film it and then put it together into like a viewable format for people. So we took this un-Hollywoodized approach to, there's all the shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and, Paranormal Night, whatever. There's tons of them. They're all very showy. They're all very over dramatized and very Hollywood. We wanted to do the opposite of that. Like we still tell a narrative story and you get to know us as investigators and everything. But if we go to a location, that we were allowed to film, and we do our investigation and film it all, and nothing happens, well, then you get to see that nothing happens, and we sort of explain why probably nothing happened, etc. Because that's more realistic than trying to say that every time you're there something happens, right? Like,
is there a disclaimer at the beginning of every episode that says, "Hey, in case there's nothing that happens to it"?
We would put up the following as an un-Hollywood, and we had like this disclaimer just so people don't go in expecting that one of us gets possessed every week or anything like that, because that just doesn't happen. So
oh gosh, so it's the Zach Bagans-less episodes of Ghost Hunt.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Bagans free.
I'm sorry, Zach. Sorry. I appreciate. I'm going to have to send a text to Heather thanking her for recommending you as a guest, because I've really enjoyed listening to the stuff about the Lake Okanagan Monster. Well, I guess it's not Lake Ogopogo, but the Ogopogo Monster. I've enjoyed that. I think everybody's going to enjoy watching Cursed Waters and seeing what you guys did. It sounds great. So go get the book. Check out your paranormal stuff. I mean, I think everything that you're doing sounds great and sounds like a lot of fun. And for our listeners of the Midweek Howl, I think we may have something cooking with Jason to have him as a guest on with me and the Howler and talk a little crime scene journalism.
That'd be cool, man. I'd be all about that. I don't get to talk about that stuff anymore. So that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So keep an eye out. Maybe sometime in the next couple weeks, we'll have a good episode and hear some good crime stories, because that's something that all of our fans ask about. So we'll get some firsthand here. Well, not firsthand, because I don't want to insinuate that Jason's the one that committed the crime. So Jason, thanks again for hanging out, and I hope our guests enjoyed everything that you talked about, because I certainly did.
Well, I had a great time, man. Thanks so much for having me on. It was really great coming on, and I had a lot of fun for this last hour. It was a great time.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.